Primitive reflexes are reflexes that babies have. They help with survival, and they help with the early stages of development. They help a baby start to sit up. They help a baby start to crawl. They even help in the birth process. There are certain primitive reflexes that cause a wriggling motion that helps a baby be born and participate in that process. As much as I don't have personal experience with this, mothers can tell you that it's a pretty difficult thing to do. So all the help they can get is absolutely necessary. This is an example of a primitive reflex. You can see this little baby over here, and somebody has tilted him backwards, and they put their arms out and they take a deep breath like that because they're stimulated, because they feel like they're falling and they're trying to grab onto anything. It's a survival mechanism. It's called the Moro reflex. Very commonly seen in children with autism, and it creates a lot of problems because it interferes with the normal development of the child. If they're stuck at this pattern where they should have developed the part of the brain above it, which should then fire down to inhibit these patterns, we see them and they're interfering with the regular development of the child. So vestibular-related problems, which is basically balance, motion sickness, poor performance in ball games, physical timidity, because their systems are very heightened. The Moro reflex is very important in the arousal of the child. There is a theory now, and it's becoming more popular, that SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, is a problem with the Moro reflex, where the Moro is not functioning very well, and it does not stimulate the breath, and the child expires, and it's terrible. They also have problems with photosensitivity, reaction to light, difficulty with black print on paper, and this goes to a lot of problems that kids have in school because of the photosensitivity. They're not seeing the difference between the black and the white. The white just kind of overwhelms everything, so it makes it very difficult to read. Auditory confusion, hypersensitivity to sound, dislike of change, which is very, very common in children on the spectrum. Even children with ADD, ADHD, autism, Asperger, across the spectrum that they have this problem. A suck and root reflex, right? This is what allows a baby to suckle at his mother's breast. It's a reflex. It connects the hands and the mouth, and many times this is sort of a more, I don't want to say advanced, but when the problems in the child are a little bit more severe, you tend to see more of this type of thing going on. But it interferes with food choices because the mouth is not coordinated very well, because when you touch it, the tongue comes forward and it creates this sucking response, and it makes it difficult for kids to eat. It also makes it difficult for kids to speak and articulate properly. And it's connected to manual dexterity, this one at the bottom, which means the movement of the hand, because the hand and the mouth are very, very much connected. We see this in children when they are breastfeeding. They will be sucking and they'll be pushing on the breast with their hands. Right? So that's probably the first one on the next one. The next one is the palmar reflex, which when you put your finger in a baby's hand, they clench their hand. So it's connected to the suck and root, and prevents good manual dexterity, because these are reflexes. These are not being controlled by the upper parts of the brain. They're getting in the way of what we're trying to do. Right? These higher centers of the brain, these cortical functions, the functions of the cortex, are much more advanced. And when you have these reflexes, they get in the way of all that, and they don't allow that to develop the way that it's supposed to. Pincer grip when trying to write, and this goes to a lot of problems that our kids are having in school, especially higher functioning autistic children, kids with ADD, kids with dyslexia, other problems like that. You start to see how this is a neurological problem. This is not a disciplinary problem. This is not a problem with a child who doesn't want to succeed, who's not motivated. This is a problem when they have a great difficulty with putting pen to paper, to manipulating the pen, to some of the ones later on are going to talk about focusing and tracking and following a teacher from one side of the room to the other. These are all very real problems that kids have, and they're neurologically based. And so we look at these to see if they're present, and then we come up with ways of remediating these problems. Again, speech difficulties because of the connection between the mouth and the hand. hypersensitivity, and difficulty. Oh, and these children, when they're trying to write, they're the ones that are going. They're moving their mouth when they're trying to write or trying to do anything with their hands. When you see them playing a video game, and their tongue out like that, there's a big connection there. This is the asymmetric tonic neck reflex. Okay, and this one is more common than the other ones that we've seen so far. This one is really important because it does a few things. It helps coordinate the two sides of the body together, right? And this reflex is basically what you see here is that the baby turns his head. And most parents have this picture of their child laying in the grass or laying on the bed like that, right? So it straightens the arm that you're looking at and it bends the other arm. It helps to develop the distance and the perception of the distance between the eyes and the hand, which is really important if you're trying to function in the world. You have to know how far away you can reach and get something, especially in the beginning. It's also very much related to, because it's this bilateral motion, it connects the two sides. And it helps us to find a target on one side and follow it to the other side. Or start doing something with our body on this side and cross the midline to the other side. So a lot of times, you see children who are having trouble with walking or with changing hands or throwing, things that involve both sides of the body. They also misrepresent in their coloring the figures of human beings. Like one side is much bigger than the other side. Perceptual differences that way. An ocular pursuit movements, especially at the midline. Okay, what that means is basically there are two types of eye movements that are important. One is a slow movement when you acquire a target and you track it in your visual field. Okay. The other one is a quick movement that the eyes move very fast and they acquire a target that they can then track. Okay, so these are two different parts and they're mediated by different parts of the brain. And so it gives us a really good window into what's going on with a child when we can look at these different neurological signs. And the asymmetric tonic neck reflex is very, very important in the ability to cross the midline and to move the eyes across the middle. Children with the asymmetrical tonic neck reflex tend to not choose one side very easily. They're not right-handed or left-handed a lot of times, or maybe they're right-handed but they use their left foot for things, or maybe they prefer an ear, their left ear and their right hand, or maybe they don't care very much. And actually, that makes things difficult because when things are automatic, then you don't use a lot of energy thinking about them. Right? So if I'm not thinking about it, I'm just going to reach out and take my hand and write or eat or whatever I'm going to do. If I'm not thinking about which hand I'm going to use, it makes it easier for me to do just about anything I want to do. They have poor handwriting and expression of ideas on paper because when they turn their head, it tends to straighten that arm out. So they have to expend energy to bring that back in and then do their work. So that makes it difficult, and kids get frustrated just like anybody else. They see everybody else doing these things. They have no idea why they're having more difficulty than the other kids in class, and they may try to distract from that. Act out in class, be the class clown. Distract from the reality, which is they're having a lot of difficulty and they don't want to talk about it. Visual perceptual difficulties, as I mentioned, the asymmetrical representation of figures. They don't see the world the same way that other people do, what we call neurotypical people do. There are these discrepancies. And we'll actually talk more about discrepancies later on. This is the symmetric tonic neck reflex, as opposed to the asymmetric tonic. These are the kids that you see in class, and they're writing like this. And what happens is the head comes down, and the arms flex, or the head goes back and the arms extend. Right? Those are the big features of this primitive reflex. And so when you see these types of things happening, it's a clue. Something's going on here. Something needs to be addressed in the nervous system. Another important thing here is the difficulty of adjusting binocular vision from far to near. So if I'm sitting in a classroom and I'm looking out at the blackboard and then I want to change down to my paper, it's going to take me a second to do that, and by the time I'm down here and I've adjusted my vision, the teacher is on to the next sentence, and so I'm lost now. I didn't follow because I was doing something else neurologically that took more effort for me because it wasn't automatic, because the reflex got in the way. So these are really, really important things to look at. And they're very, very close to the bottom of the neurodevelopment. They happen very early.